These are the best and the worst Amazon marketplaces to sell on in 2020. So Amazon.com, based in the US, is obviously the king of e-commerce, but did you know there are actually 16 Amazon marketplaces? And worldwide, over 50% of Amazon's traffic actually comes from outside the US. That's absolutely huge. And a really common question that I get is, Myles, I'm a guy or a girl from Australia. I'm living in Australia. Shouldn't I just start selling on Amazon Australia instead? Or Myles, I live in Germany. Shouldn't I sell in Amazon Germany? Again, this is more than 50% of Amazon's traffic, and it's a very valid question. Wouldn't it be easier to just start selling where you're living or in another country where there's still lots of demand, but it's going to be much, much easier to make sales? It is a really valid question, and deciding where to start selling on Amazon, which marketplace to start selling on, is an absolutely pivotal decision that could make or break your business. So in this video, I'm going to answer that question, and I'm going to rank all of the marketplaces from best to worst so you know where you should start selling. So let's get into the computer and find out. All right, welcome to the PC battle station. So we're going to rank Amazon's marketplaces from best to worst so that you know which marketplace you should sell in. I'm going to give you the data. I'm going to show you how I've calculated this and how I've ranked it based on what I believe is the best way to do this. We're going to go through that. I'm going to explain everything, and then you'll have that ranking. And then at the end of the video as well, I'm also going to talk about my own thoughts and how we're actually applying this information in our own business. By the way, if you haven't already done so, make sure to go and subscribe to the channel right now. Go click that subscribe button, click the notification bell as well, so you're the first to get videos like this. And without further ado, let's go and do this. Let's rank these marketplaces from best to worst. So there are two factors that you need to know about particularly if you're a new seller, but even if you're an existing seller looking to expand. The first factor that is really important in terms of ranking these marketplaces is demand. Ultimately, how many customers are there on these Amazon marketplaces? How much money are they willing to spend on Amazon? And therefore, how much money can you actually make if you list your products on that marketplace? Now, you might be wondering, well, what about, competition and saturation? And, I want to get into this market that has no other sellers. That's true. And in a previous video, which I'll leave up here, I talked more about the competitive side and actually getting into efficient marketplaces. But honestly, if you're doing things right in 2020, you don't care too much about competition, because the way that we're doing things, the way that works most effectively today and has been working for the last year, 2 years, is not worrying about competition, because you're actually going and improving a product. So all you really care about at this initial stage is you need to know that there's actually demand on that marketplace. You need to know there are customers there willing to spend money for the right product. Then you come along, you build the right product, you improve the product so that you can meet this unfulfilled demand, and then that's how you make a lot of money. So in this case, we're focusing on the demand side because, again, we're going to blow the competition out of the water. We're going to do that later on. Right now, we're just trying to choose where we're going to sell on. That's the first thing, is demand. So that's what I'm going to look for, and look for metrics that actually help me verify, is that demand there? And relatively speaking, where am I going to find better demand? Again, more customers that are willing to spend more money on my products, and therefore, how much money am I going to make? So that's number one, demand. And then number two is data, particularly as a newer seller. If you're coming into this with no existing experience, you don't already have brands set up, you don't already have products selling somewhere online, you need to be able to validate everything that you're going to do, the niche you're going to enter. You need to be able to validate that with data. So that will be the second point I'll talk about, which is, can you get the data out of these marketplaces to actually validate your ideas, to be able to move forwards with confidence? Because we want to do this, we want to minimize risk, de-risk this process. And for that, we need to know there's demand, and we need to know that there's also data that we can analyze. Those two things. So let's start with demand. And the way that I thought about this is actually different to the way that I've done this before. I just went and looked at the traffic, which is actually going to all of these marketplaces. There's a really simple tool that you can do this with very easily. It's called SimilarWeb. So I'm going to go through this and show you the numbers that I grabbed when I went to amazon.com.au for Amazon Australia. Amazon.ca is Canada. And for each of those ones, I basically plug it into here, and you just go like this. You go amazon.com.au. And then for each of these websites, you can actually scroll right down and you can see the amount of traffic per month coming into this marketplace, right? So for Amazon Australia, it's around about 22 million. I'm taking April data for all of these. So let's say 22.5 million visits monthly. And I took that data and I filled this in for all of these markets. So that is giving us, again, it's just the amount of people that are going to these Amazon marketplaces. So already we can see, where is most of the demand coming from? The most visits, it goes straight to Amazon.com, and that completely makes sense. It's the original, it's the biggest marketplace. We all knew that. There's nothing too much to learn here, but we can already start to see some interesting pictures in terms of some of these marketplaces, like Singapore, for example, 2.9 million visits. Now, I know this is just traffic, so maybe particularly if you're a newer seller, you haven't done e-commerce before, you're like, what does traffic mean? I'm going to get to that. I'm going to put dollars to that amount and actually help you understand that in a more meaningful way. But to start off with, just understand that the more traffic you get, the better it is, because it means more people are looking at your products, and so therefore more people can buy your products. So 50% of the total, like I said earlier, just under 50% of the total, about 49% actually goes to the US. Here's the surprise already. I didn't realize this. Japan is actually the second most heavy traffic marketplace. I had no idea. I've never ever looked at Amazon Japan, but there you go. I knew Germany and UK were both like right up there as well. India, I didn't know about, so that's interesting. And then you've got the European marketplaces, Italy, France, Spain, 180 million, 167 million, 153 million. And then these bottom four. There were actually a couple of marketplaces that I excluded, by the way. I'm not looking at Brazil, the UAE, Netherlands, or Turkey. I could, and you could go away and do this if you're interested in those specifically, but these are the main markets that people are actually asking about, that they're thinking about selling in. So traffic, what does this tell us? First of all, there's lots of traffic going to Amazon.com, just shitloads of traffic. But what does that actually mean? Like, let's say, for example, 200 million visits in India. Is that the same as 200 million page visits in the US? Is that going to equate to you? If you're selling a product in India and your product gets viewed, let's say 200 times, are you going to make as much money as if it got viewed 200 times in the US? The answer is obviously no, but we need a way to actually quantify that. So what I did next was I actually went and got an economic metric to work this out. So GDP, PVP per capita sounds pretty complicated. What is it? It's a bit of a mouthful to explain, but basically what we're doing is taking a relative metric so that for each of these countries, we can now see how much the average person is earning in that country. And obviously, the more that the average person in the country is earning, the more they can spend, and therefore the more you can make from that traffic that's coming into the marketplace. So if we now sort by GDP per capita, what we can see is that, although Singapore is coming last in terms of traffic, 2.9 million per month is nothing compared to any of these marketplaces. At least the people who are coming and viewing Singapore, Amazon in Singapore, they're making a lot of money, greater than $100,000. Then we can see US is second on the list. So not only is there just this vast amount of traffic and vast amount of people visiting Amazon.com, but they also have the second highest GDP, purchasing power parity, per capita. Then again, Germany, which stood out already when I was looking at this just in terms of traffic, Germany was up there in the top 3, and it's also super high in terms of the income that Germans have. So Germany is looking really good based on those metrics as well. They're all pretty high. Like all of these top 3 are all good, actually. High traffic and high income. So we know that these top marketplaces, they're looking good firstly in terms of the traffic, the amount of people that could potentially see your product if you were to list it on that marketplace. And then the second metric, we know that the income of the people looking at your product is high in these countries as well. It's high in most of these, obviously very low in India, pretty low in Mexico, but in the rest, it's pretty good. So those are 2 metrics, but how do we actually combine them to then get an overall ranking from best to worst of these countries? So the next step to do that is basically normalize. So now I've just set US to be 1. So then everything is now, instead of being in dollars, it's actually compared to the US. And so that just gives us a comparison or a ratio where we can see, again, Mexico has a third the spending power of people in the US. India is 13% of the average person in the US. And so that helps us see that in relative terms. So now that we've done that little sort of mathematical trick, we can actually get a single metric that actually ranks these marketplaces, that includes both the amount of traffic they have and the amount of income that each unit of traffic or each customer brings to the table. And so when we do that, we get what I'm calling normalized demand, but don't worry too much about what it's called. Basically understand that these numbers are just going to rank these marketplaces by best to worst, okay? And I am going to reveal this here. Green is good, red is bad. So let's go through this and see what this means. So again, we're talking about, it's like a combined metric of how much traffic is there. So again, if you were to sell the same product across these marketplaces, you're going to get 100 times more traffic to that same product in the US than you would in Singapore, because it's 2,000 versus 2.9. The balancing factor is that the income of those 2.9 million people and 2.9 million visits is almost twice what it is in the United States. So we're combining those metrics, but here's the thing, guys. The US still comes out on top. And this is what I recommend to people, is just start in the US in most cases. I'm going to talk about the exceptions right now. But in most cases, the reason why the US is the best marketplace to start is that there is so much traffic coming in, and the customers that are providing that traffic, that 2.3 billion per month visits, they have a high average income of $67,000, which is this. Remember, it's the second highest on this list apart from Singapore. And again, Singapore is not an option because there's no traffic coming into the marketplace. So this metric is proving that. It's showing that the US is the best marketplace to start. Again, you may be thinking now, based on this, you're like, oh, but there's so much competition. It's so saturated. It's not saturated, and the competition isn't an issue if you go out there and you actually follow what you need to do in 2020, which is to improve your product, to identify a real need that's out there on this marketplace, and then basically come in with an improved offer. It's not that hard to do. It's very easy if you follow the process, and you can see how much money there is to be made specifically in the US market on Amazon.com. So that's number one. And that ties in with what I tell people, is that's your number one option. Start in the US. Now let's go through some of these other options, because I know a lot of people ask me about Australia, Mexico, and Singapore, which are way down on the bottom. So I'm going to talk about that. But second on the list and third on the list, I see these as really high potential. And there are reasons why a lot of people won't go into these markets. Japan, for example, I have literally never ever looked at Amazon Japan before in my life. This is the first time I've ever even thought about it. And I'm going to do some more thinking about it after this video, to be honest. I know there's a language barrier. I'm sure there are other barriers to actually selling on Japan. But the fact is here, Japan, Amazon.co.jp, the Japanese Amazon marketplace, has the second highest amount of traffic. So it's got the second highest amount of demand there. And the income of people in Japan, their spending power basically, is relatively high on this list. It's not the highest. If we were to sort this again, where is it? It's middle of the pack. But the fact is, language barrier, so most people probably aren't going to try. Secondarily, lots of traffic. And third, they do still have a high spending power. So Japan looks good. Germany is exactly the same. I've been talking about Germany to a lot of people recently. The barriers are VAT, the barriers are language. But if you want to overcome those barriers, you're going to get lots of traffic that has a high spending power, and that is a high spending power. Third on the list in terms of all of these marketplaces. And yeah, I think it absolutely makes sense that Germany is top on this list apart from Japan, which again, I didn't think about Japan before. And UK comes in as another really good option. Now, the UK doesn't have the language barrier, so that makes it a lot more attractive to a lot of people. And I mean, I put my money where my mouth is. We're actually, I don't know if you can see that, but we're in the middle of a launch right now that's literally blowing up our sales to triple, 4 or 5 times what they were before. So now we're doing around about £2,500 per day in the UK. That's just a brand new launch. We've just started doing this because again, there's still lots of traffic. Obviously it's not as much as the US, but there's lots of traffic, and the purchasing power of those customers is high. So if you can go in there with a good product idea, a good offer, the demand is there. Going down the list, we've got France, Italy, Canada. Actually, this is a surprise standout. So France, Italy, and Spain, I'm not really big on. I do know some sellers that do very well there. Again, the language barrier. So if you can speak one of those languages, it just gives you a nice home ground advantage. Or if you're based in one of those countries, this is the sort of middle pack area where not that many people want to sell in those marketplaces. There's obviously, the purchasing power they're all pretty good. But I think the actual standout here looks like Canada to me, where there's still this traffic, considering that the population of Canada, I could be wrong, is around about 30 something million, which is a lot less than France, it's a lot less than Italy, and it's a lot less than Spain. But the traffic is right up there in the middle of the pack. So there's less people in Canada, but they're shopping on Amazon more often, and they have a higher purchasing power. So I actually quite like Canada as this sort of like an alternative option if you've already looked at these and for some reason, or you've already expanded into these, you started with the US, then you looked at your second best options, including Japan. Then there's this third tier of France, Italy, Canada, Spain. I'd be looking at Canada because it's very easy, by the way. If you're already selling in the US, you can just turn on the remote fulfillment. You can immediately just start seeing what it's like. And then you can investigate actually selling or sending inventory into Canada as well. So that looks good as a standout, even though, again, this ranking isn't that high. But I think out of these ones, if you speak English as a native language, maybe Canada's the go. Then we've got the bottom tier. So I'm calling these the bottom tier marketplaces, guys. So remember, this is a ranking, and this is the ranking that I'm following in terms of best to worst. So US at the top, the second tier, Germany, Japan, UK, second tier, and then the Italian ones the European ones plus Canada as third tier, and this is the bottom tier. I don't really see any reason why you would be looking at any of these marketplaces. There's very little traffic in most cases, except for India, but with India, the demand or the ability for that traffic to actually convert into a purchase is low because they don't have any money or very little money relative to these other marketplaces. I do see India as the highest growth potential. So if you were looking at this as a long-term business, then India is probably the one that's going to grow the most, and potentially also maybe Mexico out of these marketplaces. But they just don't look that good. There's such little traffic, there's such little demand. And for example, if you're looking at this as like a growth play, you're thinking, oh, I'll get there before everyone else. But really, guys, you don't want to be that early to the party. You want to be fashionably on time. Maybe you're a little bit late now if you get to the US, but it doesn't matter. The party's cranking. You know, there's lots of beer. There's a big cake. That's probably the secondary sort of analogy that I'd use as well, is like, if you're going for these little marketplaces just because you're trying to sneak under the competition, you're trying to get around all of the other sellers that are making all of this money on, you know, Amazon US or any of these top marketplaces, if you're just trying to sneak away, it's like there's a really great big birthday cake, and it's, you know, it's Black Forest chocolate cake. It's absolutely delicious. It's this really big cake, looks amazing. And there's a line of people actually who are lining up to get a piece of that giant, delicious cake. But you don't want to get in line to get some of the cake, which is amazing. So then you go and look at this other like old, crusty, crumbly, just like leftover piece of crap cake. And then you start nibbling at the little leftover old moldy cake. And, you know, what's the point in that? It's a shitty cake. Go for the good cake. It doesn't matter if there are more people eating parts of the cake. The cake is so big and so delicious and so rich that there's plenty to go around. That was a really weird analogy. I hope that made sense. But that's the way that I'm applying my thought process to this in terms of marketplaces to look at. So I wouldn't go for these bottom tier marketplaces at all. That's the demand equation. And really you are focusing on demand, or should be focusing on demand at this stage. Again, because if you know how to improve your product, you know how to create an improved offer, the competition doesn't matter so much. What matters is demand. So that's the first point. I hope I answered that. You now have that ranked in terms of best to worst, and you've got the groupings as well: best, second best, third best, and worst. Next, let's talk about data. So this is the second point, is like, even if you forget all of my advice and you go and try and sell in Australia or Singapore, the next thing that you need to worry about, particularly as a new seller, if you're brand new to this, is you need to be able to make good decisions based on data. And how do you get that data? Generally, it's using any of the product research tools. You could use Helium 10, you could use Jungle Scout, or you could use Viral Launch. There are other alternatives. I don't recommend them. These three are the best, and they're the best for a reason. But having said that, you still need to be able to use those tools to dive into the marketplace, to be able to evaluate, revenue versus reviews versus sales history and trends and all of that sort of stuff. That is one of the reasons why this business model is so amazing, is because generally that data is available for you to see. However, it is not always available for you to see if you go for these other marketplaces. So some of these tools allow you to actually get that data, and some of these tools don't work in these marketplaces. So let's very quickly, I went and had a look at each of these websites to see what they support. And if you're in most of these top tier marketplaces, you're okay. They all do it, except for Helium 10 and Jungle Scout don't do Japan, which again is just another nice barrier. If you're an existing seller, for example, you have brands that you would be willing to just send some to Japan. That's just another thing that's keeping other people out, because people can't see the data on Japan, which is great. But anyway, if you're in the top tier, the second tier, or even the third tier, you're okay. But if you start looking at these bottom tier marketplaces, you are not okay anymore, because most of these tools don't allow you to see the data. And the reason why is there's not enough demand. Again, the traffic is very low. There aren't that many purchases happening on the marketplace. So it's hard to get the data, and it's hard to make it accurate. So if you're looking at these marketplaces, not only is demand not there, but then secondly, the data is probably not there either. So you're going to go into this blind, not being able to do proper data analysis, and then you're going to be disappointed because there's no demand, so no one is actually looking to buy your product. It doesn't matter how good you make it, doesn't matter how much you improve it. If no one's typing it into amazon.com.au, you cannot make sales. It's as simple as that. So conclusions. Number one, if you're a new seller, firstly, you want a marketplace that gives you demand, because then you can move into that marketplace and you can actually fill up some unfilled demand. If the marketplace has no demand, you can't do that. Therefore, you can't win. So according to that metric, then you want to look at the US, first place. Depending on which barriers you're okay to jump over, whether it's language barriers or VAT tax barriers, then these are the second tier best marketplaces to look at. Otherwise, consider any of these. And my recommendation is probably do not look at any of these marketplaces based on demand. Secondly, if you're a new seller, then you need data. So again, these, if you're using Helium 10, then go with the ones that have a yes next to them. Or you could go Jungle Scout or Viral Launch if you want to look at these other ones that Helium 10 doesn't offer. If you're an existing seller, focus more on the marketplace where you're currently selling, as long as you're able to continue just driving that wedge into your existing category, your existing niche. And again, there's more unfilled demand there that you can launch new products to fill. Just stay where you are right now. It does take time to launch into other marketplaces. If, however, you have started to run into obstacles with your current marketplace, it's getting harder to grow, you should definitely think about expanding to one of these other marketplaces. Lots of them have lots of demand. As I've shown you in this video, the demand is there, it's waiting to be taken. And if you can see that as a next big growth opportunity, absolutely consider one of these. I'm assuming you're already selling in the US, so consider one of these marketplaces to start off with. For our business personally, like I just showed you, we have launched in the UK already, and we will be blowing that up and continuing to. We want to get that to 100K per month. And then next we'll have our sights on getting one of these other marketplaces to 100K per month as well. So that'll be our focus. I'll be sharing that stuff privately in the progress and what we're doing with my students. So if you're interested in learning about that, or if you just want to learn from me in general, then make sure to go and check out the free training video in probably the first link in the description down below, and you'll find out the process and how that works from there. Otherwise, make sure to subscribe to the channel if you haven't already done so. Make sure to smash the like button as well. If you've watched this far in the video, you've probably got value out of it. Smashing that like button will help show me that it's worth making these videos, and it helps spread the video a little bit as well. So I really appreciate it. Leave any comments down below. What do you think about this? Is this going to affect what marketplace you were thinking about selling in? Or what marketplace are you selling in right now? Let me know in the comments down below. I'm also going to leave another video that I did. I'll leave that up here, and that will break down this from a different perspective, talking about reviews and the competition side as well. Whereas in this video, I just talked about demand. So check that video out if you want to continue and learn more about this. And otherwise, I'll see you in the next video.